Good evening. Tonight I have got a very special guest with us. We've got Matt Glover, who is a Baptist minister. Hello, Matt.
Hi, nice to be here.
Now, as a Baptist minister, you've been working with the LGBTIQ community for about how long?
It's almost 20 years now.
About nearly 20 years that you've been working with the GLBTIQ community, as I like to call them. So what is the question that you are asked the most?
The question that I'm asked most frequently, and by LGBTI people and straight people alike, is whether or not I'm gay.
Okay. And the answer is?
No. Very straight.
In fact, you've got a lovely wife and you've got two?
Two boys, yeah.
Two boys.
Been married for 17 years. We've got two boys. The oldest is 10 and the youngest is 8.
Okay. So how long have you been a minister for?
I've been a minister now for 15 years. 15 years.
So you'd been working with the LGBTI community before you started?
Yeah, before I started formal ministry in a church, so before I was employed in a church, I was volunteering my time to do pastoral care for the gay and lesbian community here in Melbourne.
Okay, cool. So now we won't mention the name of the, is it you call it the church or the
church, yes.
Yeah, of the particular church. So you're working for a church, and I believe you started working on a document for the LGBTIQ community. Mm-hmm. Tell me about the document.
Well, the document was part of my ordination studies, so it was a graduate diploma in theology, and the title of the document was A Pastoral Response to Homosexuality in the Church. And the reason that I wanted to write a pastoral response was that the vast majority of things that had been written before that were either biblical debates or moral debates or theological debates or ethical debates. And there were two sides to each of these debates and arguments, but the people that were caught in the middle were forgotten. And so I wanted to write a response that was pastoral, that didn't worry so much about the extremes of the arguments, but cared for those people that were in the middle. And so that was the purpose of that document.
Okay, so what does pastoral mean?
Pastoral means the care for another person.
Okay, all right, because I think of like green valleys with sheep and little men in blue boys, but all right, well, not little men in blue boys, little boys in blue, sorry, just clarify that.
That's where it comes from, you know, that pastoral image or metaphor certainly goes back to the days of shepherds that looked after flocks of sheep and cared for them. They fed them, they watered them, they kept them safe from predators and things like that. So a person that does pastoral care looks after the well-being of a person.
So the church is then supposed to, I guess, look after its flock and look after its people, etc. So what was happening to the people that were stuck in between the argument against or for homosexuality? Sure.
Look, certainly for gay and lesbian people or LGBTIQ people that had a faith background, they were stuck in the middle. You know, there was part of the gay community that wouldn't accept them because they identified as Christian. There was the Christian community that wouldn't accept them because they identified as gay, and then didn't know where they belonged, and all sorts of issues associated with that. High levels of poor mental health, high levels of suicide, and things like that. For me, you know, it was blindingly obvious that this is where we should be. If we were going to be pastoral, if we were going to be caring for those in our community that didn't have a voice, this is what we needed to be doing, not having these arguments that left people isolated and stuck in the middle.
Okay, now the church then, I guess, would be aware of the document that you wrote, and how did they react? What happened after that?
Well, look, as I said, I wrote it as part of my study, so it was never written for the church that I was working in or any particular church. It was just written for my own benefit, for the benefit of people that I knew that were working with the LGBTIQ community. And of course, because of the topic that was there, it was posted online very quickly and just, you know, kind of everywhere before you could know it. And that was okay. I didn't have an issue with that. But then, of course, as more and more people saw it, they would, you know, print it out and give it to people in my church and say, "Did you know that your pastor wrote this?"
Okay, yeah.
And things like that. And like, I was more than happy to talk about it with whoever wanted to. But I was also very conscious that in the church that I was working at at the time, you know, there were lots of different opinions about homosexuality, and I didn't want it to be an issue that was, you know, this is all that Matt spoke about. You know, for me, the thing that I was called to do was to care for whoever it was that was in my community, not just gay and lesbian people.
Okay, so, but moving on with the story, because I like a bit of drama, so people are starting to hand this thing around going, have you heard, have you heard, have you heard? What happens after that?
Well, we had lots of discussions, and we talked a lot about sexuality in the church, and not just people with same-sex orientations, but sexuality is not covered well in churches anyway.
But hang on, like during Mass, you...
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
With them answering back and saying this is what we think.
We didn't do practical demonstrations. It was just talk. Okay, it's not that sort of church. But we talked about the different issues that were associated with sexuality. One of my things was that certainly for young people that grew up in the church, all we were doing was giving them a list of things that you don't do. So if you're going to stay faithful, you don't do this, 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 and this. But didn't help them explore what they did do to express their sexuality, either as a single person or as a person in a relationship, boyfriend, girlfriend, or whatever, engaged person, married person. How do you express your sexuality as a person of faith? Are there rules there, or are there not? So
I guess it's fairly confronting, because was it a metropolitan church or?
No, this particular church was a semi-rural church.
Semi-rural.
So the churches that I had been up until that point were suburban churches, and I had the same discussions in those churches as well.
Okay.
And as you say, quite confronting, quite uncomfortable. Some people just flatly refused to take part in those discussions.
Yeah.
Other people had this huge sigh of relief. It's like, yes, finally we're talking about the things that actually matter. Rather than these things that are nice to hear about but don't actually make a difference to our weekday lives.
Okay. And then now I believe that you were called in by, I guess, the leaders of the church at one stage?
At this semi-rural church, this last church, my views on gay and lesbian people and their place in the church and their place before God was quite different to some of the leaders of the church. And I don't know if you remember, but it was about July 2 years ago when the push for marriage equality really started to heat up. And my personal view is that I'm supportive of marriage equality. And I was contacted by the Australian Marriage Equality Movement asking if I, as a Christian minister, would allow my photo and a quote to go on the website, which I was more than happy to do, though I made a point of saying this quote comes from me, it does not represent the people of my church. Okay, so the quote was, Reverend Matt Glover, Baptist minister, not my church mentioned at all. And I thought that was the right thing to do, because I couldn't speak on behalf of everybody in my church on that particular
I'll move
issue.
you along though, because we are running a little bit out of time. So, but there was a but.
There was a but. So that was July. By September, there were meetings called. Very traumatic 2 months, September, October. And then at the start of December, there was a vote called as to whether I should be fired or not because of my views, a recognition that firing me because of that would be illegal, but it was impossible for me to stay. And so I resigned.
Okay, so you actually resigned. All right,
yes.
Okay. But they had a bit of a chat with you beforehand?
Didn't have a chat with me face to face. It was all done in meetings that I wasn't invited to. Some I could have gone to if I'd wanted to, but it just wasn't appropriate for me to be there, and it was too traumatic to be there as well. When you're being torn to pieces in front of a group of 300 people, not something that's pleasant.
Look, thank you very much for coming in. We do have to move on, but thanks. That's Matt Glover. You are still a minister, and he's also a counsellor around. You've got a website?
I have, My website is mgacounselling.com.au, MGA standing for Matt Glover and Associates.
Well, that's it for A Queer Idea today. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you to Matt Glover.